Welcome to episode 795 of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, here tonight with the co host of the show, Jen the Arcane Observer. And tonight we will be talking about werewolves. As always, you can find all links to all episodes, social media, ways to listen, and ways to support the show, including the Patreon feed and the merch store at the website. And that is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. And it's I want to thank everyone for supporting the show so far. And support is never expected, but always appreciated, as there are expenses in making these shows. Also, as I always like to say, please check out the links in every episode description to other friends of the show, for Jen, the Arcane Observer, and her channel, as well as for Michael Strange and his show, Trouble Minds Radio, as well as the network, the Trouble Minds Radio Network, KUAP Digital Broadcasting, where you can hear all kinds of amazing shows, along with mine, 24/7, online, nonstop. So, so that's all that I have for the usual introduction. I found a few articles. I put them in the chat, and I already have them in the show notes and sources Discord channel as well. And but tonight we're talking about werewolves, and we won't be relying heavily on the articles because there's just so much there. But I'll just mention them as we go along. But I know that my co-host here was very excited for this topic. So, Jen, welcome to the show.
Hey, I was really excited about it. Werewolves, I think, are one of the most incredible cryptids, of all the ones I've ever looked into, and one of the funnest ones,
Yeah, they and they're so often people think of them just like in a negative sense, but there's plenty of legends and folklore where they can be good or bad. They can be protectors or they can be the opposite. But
Yeah.
so go ahead with whatever your thoughts are to start with, and we'll go from there. It's okay.
I don't know. I've always the interest as far as like the lore and everything. I remember when I was like probably 5 years old, one of the very first scary movies I ever watched was Silver Bullet. Have you ever seen that movie? It's a classic, Stephen King.
I
And have you ever
think
seen it?
I can't. Was that the one that you had me watch a while ago? I forget now. I
I don't know.
think
I
it
tried
might
to
have
get you
been.
to watch it for sure. The whole
Yeah,
premise
that's the
of
one.
it's
Yeah.
like this, yeah, it's a small town, and suddenly, like, people start getting attacked by, they think it's just some kind of wild animal, or maybe it's a murderer or something, and then it starts this whole sort of mystery of trying to figure out, who done it or who's the werewolf, that sort of thing. And it's a really awesome movie. And I remember watching that so many times when I was a kid, and just it was the first time I had ever heard of even the concept. I just kind of thought of it as a monster essentially, but then as time went on, just the whole idea of like, would it be possible? Is it conceivable? And then finding out that throughout history that there have been, just true accounts, of course, according to a lot of people, in the old world, that there were, and then even more present stories, that it's still an ongoing sort of phenomenon of people encountering werewolves, the dog man encounters, that sort of thing. And just seeing, it's almost like it's a similar premise to seeing the Sasquatch, but it's a sort of canid. And then I was doing a lot of research at one point into the cynocephaly, which is like these dog-headed peoples. And some people say it was just an analogy. It had a lot to do with, like, there were references to Canaan, and which is, like back in the biblical times, and these different lands and peoples, and the Canaanite religion, but the references to the cynocephaly as being this type of warrior, uh, these warrior tribes, essentially, that were, in some accounts, that they literally were some type of canid man, the cynocephaly, and that they spoke. Some of them could speak, and then there's been references too to one of the saints that was often seen too as like a cynocephaly. But then, so it's really interesting as far as that goes. And then I found a lot of woodcuts too at another point that had people depicted with like tails, long dog tails and things like that, and being particularly hairy. And you can find those old woodcuts if you dig around. And I'll have to post some later and I'll send them to you. I should have picked them up before the show, but I didn't do a lot of, gathering of anything for it. So I
That's
mean, just the
okay.
whole concept that there could be, or that there has been, the concept of the werewolf. I think even with the dogman encounters, so people report seeing the dogman is kind of different, I think, in that they talk about the dogman as being in its natural state, but no one's really at a consensus on that. There's no, rules about necessarily, but the sheer number of people who have seen these, you know, basically, up to 12 foot, they report seeing these huge creatures that are also too they're just enormous, but have the face of like a German shepherd or a wolf. And they have several different types. I've heard of, they categorize them into 3 different types of dogmen that have, and that those variances have to do with, the size, the color of the coat, the eyes, the length of the tail, the shape of where the ears set, sort of thing. Like some of them have these extraordinary long pointed ears, and some have almost no apparent obvious ears, like they're short cropped to the head almost, as far as a lot of the dogman encounter descriptions that I've heard about. But it's really interesting because some people report them as, going from all fours onto bipedal. And then it's different from accounts of finding wild dogs that have had, you know, deformities that require them to run on this. So it's just a really unique topic as far as, but there's also the condition. I heard one story at some point that there was a man who had, I can't remember what it brought it all about, but in this story, there was, I guess there were people getting attacked or something, and someone had, I guess, kind of, I don't know how they came across it, but there was this old man that had like a tire shop, mechanic shop, and it had been abandoned. Like he had abandoned the property, but they found like a lair essentially, and they had like chains on the walls, and like there was hair everywhere, and the scent of like dead animals, almost like sort of this idea that there was literally in this town, and this old man who had a mechanic's tire shop. I can't remember the story. I'll have to find it. But that he was a werewolf was kind of the account. So it's just really interesting. Just all these stories when you really look into it.
Yeah, there's a lot, and that's a lot of that stuff I didn't think about Dogman, but there is so much of that. There's reports of that just around even Michigan in particular, northern Michigan, reports of that, and that's something else we can look into later, or go into more maybe another time as well. We could push the black-eyed people or children show for another week and do a whole separate show on Dogmen as well. I think we could probably easily find stuff for that. But yeah, it's so the articles I found, they talk about and they do talk about other kinds of people that change into the shapes of other animals as well, but so they don't just cover werewolves, but so let me just bring up this first article here, and this is from Atlas Obscura, and it talks about let's see, this one, yeah, this is the one I wanted. It's the let's see, the long hidden history of the Viking obsession with werewolves. And it talks about how it's a symbol both of chaos and order. So both, again, like I mentioned earlier. And it says, the article here says it came to represent many things for the Vikings. There was an 1882 engraving of Ragnarok, which is the Viking doomsday. Shows Odin mounted on a horse and fighting the wolf Fenrir. And that's just an early example of that. There's so let's see here. Looking at this article here, it goes into a lot of talking about let's see here. That's what it was. Talks about these two thieves. I'm gonna Sigmunder, and his son Sin. Not Sinfjo with two dots over it. TLI. But this father and son happened up on a house. They found a house, and it looked empty. So as they were thieves, they slipped inside to find two wealthy men fast asleep. And hanging above these two men were these wolf skins. And the father and son, of course, being thieves, took the wolf skins and put them on. And this is according, I'm guessing here, also to folklore as well. And once they put them on, they started to change. And they started to walk on all fours and grow long, fang-like teeth. They howled at the night sky. And when they were out in the forest, they found a group of men and left all of them dead, with more than 13 victims total. But then they couldn't find anyone else to hunt, and so the father turned on the son. But once he did that, he realized what he had done, and he used a magical herb to heal his son. And eventually, once they both were okay, they got rid of the pelts and burned them, and that's sort of a story that's apparently a big part of folklore within the Viking culture there. So it says that that story is one of the Viking world's oldest and most popular tales. I think I've even heard of it, maybe not with those same names, but I feel like I've heard it on other shows over the years. It's been passed down for centuries before it was written down in a saga around 1270 AD. So this is going quite a ways back. The article says that the Vikings were obsessed with wolves and the people who became them. And so this is going back over, really, because it said that story went on for centuries, was told for centuries before being written down in 1270 AD, which means the story is over 1,000 years old. So that's just an example of how old some of these accounts, and I do believe that most, if not all, stories in folklore and culture and everything, they come from somewhere. They come from some kind of event and some basis, some fact, some, I don't know, witnessed experience that people had that led to that story. So I was just wondering if you've heard of that account as well, Jen.
I've heard of the berserkers in the Viking legends and things like that, where they'd put on, it was wolf pelts, it was bear pelts, and they would almost become like possessed by the spirits of those animals, and that they had these rituals for that. I've heard of, it's interesting, it kind of reminds me a lot of, I think, I'm not sure how you could differentiate them, but sort of like the skinwalker mythos too, of like witch doctors, shamans, things like that, putting curses on people even with that. I mean, there's a slight difference with it, I think, in a way, because with with the skinwalkers, you have this idea that I think it's actually close enough that I would tie it in with it. You know, that the idea that there are these certain shamans that can turn themselves into shapeshift into wolves. I've heard of the shapeshifting into I guess one of the most dangerous animals to shapeshift into is the raven or the bird. It's like one of the hardest ones to shapeshift into, and it's one of the hardest ones to come back from, apparently. Some shamans, I've heard shamans say that, like that's like in historical, like in books and things like that about it. But with the Viking culture, no, they seem to be extremely fixated on just but that's a unique aspect of it. What's like they have there's the idea too that they may take in certain types of like herbs and stuff as well when they would be doing these rituals to turn into the berserker, and that they would do this before battles and things like that. But I think
Right.
that it's the idea of sort of taking on the power of the animal, and that it becoming possessed with the spirit of the animal. I've really been fixated on it too, that there's something interesting about that. I've done a couple of videos on my channel. I've taken them down and put them on to just private, but that possession by animal spirits being kind of more prominent in lore than people think about. And this falls right into that, absolutely, that being possessed by the spirit of the wolf, but having spirit mixing with the soul of a man, and what you end up with, and how, while becoming one with the sort of the Lord of the Wild sort of mythos, because the whole concept of that there's this primitive force that is the sort of overseer of the entire wild kingdom of the forest, so to speak, and that there was for a time sort of a battle between, at least in a lot of these stories, with the really old wars where people were wiping out a lot of barbarian cultures, as they would put them, and things like that, that was something that was the wars were about. So with Christianization, at least to some degree, they were coming into contact with that, and you can almost see that, like I was saying, with the Cynosophily. And I don't know, like with the Cynosophily coming in contact with the Christian world and being Christianized. And you see that throughout folklore, which is just really interesting. Like when I was researching trolls, they will talk about them as like that they were unchristianized, so having not been touched yet by those belief systems. And it all goes back to this idea that there was at some point just a different world, and well, shamanism was animism and things like that, that there was a huge that was making up a lot of the belief systems, along with ancestral worship. So I just think it's really fascinating. But as far as with the Vikings, but you see that too, and there's I can't remember what it was called, so you have the Sumerians, and then you have the Cimmerians. Now, Cimmerians, people are going to think like Conan the Barbarian, that sort of thing. But Cimmerian is also another term for the Himalayas. So there's a mountain range in the Himalayan, over Nepal, and throughout that region, in the Himalayan mountains, and they're called the Cimmerian, Cimm, Simmer. So it's different than Sumer, but there's this old myth that there were a people that divided at one point, and some went to the warmer climates and some went into the snowier climates. And then they came back into contact again, and they had a lot of war with each other, but it had to do with migration. But in the Cimmerian cultures, with the sea out of the Himalayas, you find a lot of the abominable stories. So you have like the abominable snowman. You have the accounts of half animal, half human, and just and the werewolf mythos is very prominent too in a lot of those stories. But I mean, you're talking about the time of the Scythians and just a long time ago as far as human culture, but it is steeped with the idea that mankind was somehow able to blend in to the animal kingdom and to kind of put it on like a skin, so to speak. And you see that too with the water world too. You can hear about it with the Selkie mythos, where they put like typically a female mentioned, but putting on the skin of a seal and going into the ocean, or taking it off and coming up on land. So it's really interesting, just the idea of putting on the skin. But the skin too is, I've heard of the soul being considered sort of a type of, I don't know that the body is a type of, it's a skin obviously, but it's like taking on and off a garment. And so the idea of like with a werewolf, it's basically like the human soul somehow transforming into the garment of the animal. And the difference would be that the senses of that animal, the human soul shining through just the whole organism, the mind and the brain of the creature being mixed with that of the soul of a human being. So it's almost like if you ever watch like Game of Thrones, which I'm a huge fan of, and whenever they are able to go into their wolves, if you've watched Game of Thrones, I don't know if you're familiar like with the whole thing But
Not
uh,
too much, but
with George
I've heard
R.
of
R.
the show.
Martin,
Yeah.
and the books are really cool too. But the whole premise
Hmm.
there is too that when they go into those, they have memory of it, but it's almost like they become so coalesced with it that there's hunts and all the same things that you would experience if you were one of the dire wolves. But it's really fascinating, and I think that there could be something to it. At least humanity has believed that for a long time up until recently, I would suppose.
Yeah. Yep. Matt's on the DG and the Don says in the chat, Skinwalker possibly. I do have a section and then one of the articles in that, so I'll cover that in just a minute. But Matt Sala says honoring the spirit animals. Also, Sweets mentions that Matt Sala has an episode recently on shamans. So she put that link in the chat as well for the Discord, on the Discord here. So I can, if I remember, I can include that in the episode description too. But and then Joey in the chat says, I've met a few wolves. I've met a few men who carry a wolf inside them also, and I have 2 wolves inside of myself. So, and I've heard that there's this idea of the 2 wolves being inside each of us. The one that is sort of more negative, and the one that is more positive, and the idea of which one do we try to feed the most, or to be the most, I guess is another way to say it. So, but going to this other article here, it does talk about werewolf mythology and stories from around the world, and says that American cultures talk about or have many traditions of shapeshifting. Says the Navajo skinwalkers, or and they have another name for them. They're probably the name that they use to their language. And these are described as malevolent people with powers. The article says witches. I don't know if that's really that accurate, but who can transform into other animals, including wolves. They're feared entities. They're believed to have great power and the ability to control the elements, manipulate minds, and even cause death. The Navajo people believe that these people gain their abilities by performing dark rituals, and that encountering them is an omen of severe misfortune or of death. But there are other peoples, other tribes that have similar ideas. They have their own shape-shifting legends. There's the Ojibwa speak of the Wendigo, which is not exactly a werewolf, but it's associated with cannibalism uh, and uh, and winter. Uh, and then they say that the article says it's not the same, but similar ideas with human hybrids and the loss of humanity. Uh, it mentions here in Mexico. I was not aware of this at all. I heard of other ones. There is there are humans that can transform into animals, according to natives in that part of the continent. Uh, that these people are often depicted as protectors of a community, or as sorcerers with the ability to transform at will. And so yeah, these ideas are just all over the place. And again, some are some people consider them good, others bad. It's sort of a mix of these things. So, um, but yeah, so that's really amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, the Wendigo. That's always really freaked me out. Just the whole concept of it, that basically it's this wandering huge sort of spirit. Sometimes they say it's the spirit of, well, what I've heard about it, that it's the spirit of some, typically well, when that it's a shaman that's turned to like evil ways, is kind of the gist that they give to it, but that it's the spirit of them. So say that they've like taken on just a purely spiritual form. And then there's other accounts that it is not ever, was never human. But there's kind of a mixed belief about that, because at some point there's this belief that the person ceases to be a human being at a certain point. And so therefore it's like maybe they would have started out that way, but typically they were born this way and with those types of abilities. And so like the spirit of them is like a type of entity. And this has to do, I've heard about this too, like in the like the Fae world, the kind of concept is halflings, basically. That at some point there was some mingling of some kind. But with the Wendigo, it is a disembodied spirit. And typically in the winter, they'll talk about it. Not always, but in some of the accounts that I read about, that in the winter in particular, and then the cannibalistic aspect of it, that this spirit does feed on people, or at least on blood, and like but on flesh. And when people if they go out wandering in the winter into like these wastelands or places they shouldn't go, typically these places are called something, and the person knows that they shouldn't be going there, but maybe they didn't hear about it, or they found themselves wandering in these wastelands. But then they get sort of possessed by it. And at first it may just be this inkling to consume human flesh or something of the kind. But then once they fed it once, it begins to grow. And then it becomes bigger and bigger each time that they do this, until they have the spirit is typically with the human host. The spirit of the Wendigo is immensely huge, and the hunger of it's almost like a vampiric story too. Like it's a lot of the things you see with the Strigoi over in Romania, that the hunger is insatiable because the spirit has gotten huge. Though the person is gorging themselves, they don't feel full. And so it's this, that's clear, like that's what I've heard about. So it is different, quite a bit different than like with the werewolf concept, but the werewolf concept being like a lot of times just that it seems to be, as far as on the negative turn of it. Well, of course, I bring up this, that I've heard that, the werewolf thing being generational too. I mean, we should look at that aspect too, that it can't be helped. It's passed down as a sort of generational curse of sorts. But in like Romanian folklore and things like that, with that culture, they believe that it can be put onto a person almost like an evil eye, and like the person can be cursed with it. And that's sort of the concept of like getting transcended to where the person becomes a werewolf through the blood. But I think with the generational aspect versus the curse aspect, even with the generational aspect, it is seen as being a type of curse in a way, and that they are typically these outcasts. But I think it could have just been a fear. I mean, I don't think it could have been. I mean, there either it was so or not, but regardless, people had a fear of strangers. And then too, just that people who were wandering usually had been kind of like the idea of a male wolf, for example, that's sent out from its pack is typically been run off by the pack. And so these lone wolf sort of idea. So like people who are wandering around exiled may also have that sort of curse upon them in a way. And maybe they were seen as being ravenous like a wolf or something like that, but could have just been wandering people too. But the cynosophily aspect, or the aspect that there were people that were part wolf, or that there literally was a race or a species, so to speak, that was something between a man and a wolf, or a man and a canine. There was sort of like the Sasquatch concept, that there could be some type of sort of missing link. And then I've heard people talk about the similarities. There's something strange about man's best friend and all of that. I don't know. It is. There's just so much to it that is unexplained.
I found another article here, and I'll put it in the chat. And it says the title is like 28 types of werewolves. So let's see what it's from spookysite.com. And I'm just looking at it now. But it goes throughout time. But the other amazing thing is, whether it is skinwalkers or werewolves or all these things, we'll get to this at the end of the show here. Not this article, but this other thing, that there's still reports up till today. As you said earlier, Dogmen, there's still reports up to the present day of people seeing figures, seeing what appear to be werewolves or dogmen, or even people that change into these things or change back to being human or back and forth. So this is not, as always with these topics, these are not things that have just stopped, at some point in the past. People have weird experiences now where they seem to be possibly similar or maybe even the same as what people experienced in the past, which is always fascinating and frightening in a way, but also amazing as well to think about. But so this article here does talk about different types of werewolves. This first section that goes into is hereditary, and sort of what you were talking about. They're born, not made, and this is the idea of a trait or of traits being passed down through bloodlines, and it goes back to the beast of. I'm not gonna be able to say this. Gevaudan. I've heard it before on shows. I forget now. And how it's pronounced, Gevaudan or something like that. But this is thought to be one of those where it was seen and then caught, but there were still things that happened afterward that maybe hinted at there being descendants, possibly. Even if the article says even if the traits are hereditary, that doesn't mean that this type of werewolf can just wake up one day and start transforming. The ability may be passed down generation after generation, but it has to be unlocked, according to the article here. So let's see here. There's one more paragraph, so we will. So it says that you can see this narrative in European folklore, especially in Eastern Europe. And it says in some Slavic legends, noble families allegedly dealt with wolves or spirits. Again, you have that connection to get power, to acquire power, to transform themselves and their descendants into these wolves. So this is a huge article, it looks like. I wish I would have found this before. It's so big, it probably could have covered every little thing. But I'll definitely include that in the episode description as well. But yeah, so that's I think we may have to do a part 2 on this anyway and just wrap Dogman into this whole thing as well. Part 2 for next weekend, possibly.
Yeah, or we could come back to it, in a couple of weeks or just whatever. But I mean, the Dogman aspect of it is kind of controversial. Like I've talked to a couple of people about it, and actually, I think I can't. Let me see. I mean, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I just think it's interesting how they could be correlated, or at least that it's very odd. I mean, otherwise, because I mean, I had the whole Dogman thing. Actually, the first time I did hear about it, it was with the account of the what was it? I think it was Michigan Dogman, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the Beast of Bray Road. I'm not sure if it was the Beast of Bray Road, but there was the Michigan Dogman, and then there was I can't remember if it was in the same region, but there was a whole thing about that years ago where I was hearing a lot about that. But people first weren't thinking Dogman; they were thinking werewolf. A lot of the people I had talked to about it and the things I had read about it. I mean, they were calling it Dogman, but everybody was thinking it's a werewolf. And I still, because I do want to believe very much in these stories. I want to believe, but I mean, you have to be very skeptical. But I mean, I was like, I'll take it, the concept, even if they are just this missing link. But there seems to be a lot more to it. The intelligence of it is not like I mean, I think with a werewolf, I think you do have the sort of human soul aspect or something like that. But then again, it could just essentially be, I mean, as far as a type of cryptid, but the werewolf aspect of it, as far as that it's a human being that changes on a full moon into a wolf, not necessarily even just sort of typically bipedal, you know, what would you call it? A sort of even bigger version than just a wolf. I mean, it's these, yeah,
Right.
it's just this really intense sort of concept of them just what would you call it? A transformation. exactly. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily need to be just a cryptid. It seems like there's this huge aspect of it that has to do with something with the psyche of humanity. And is it possible? I mean, it seems like, I think with the shape-shifting aspect, with the skinwalker concepts, with the shamanism, which there's so much been lost, as far as all the shamanism the and all the cultures having that, and now we don't have any of it, and we just have this sort of
Right.
watered down information. But there used to be, it seemed, whole systems of how you would even do such a thing, you know? So I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. And then I do think they get lost, and it doesn't help that there's, I mean, it's a natural thing, but it also doesn't help that there's just there's so many systems all around the world that they're not all the same. So it's hard to know where to start with all that. The Bray Road, that's actually in Wisconsin, so it's not far off from Michigan. Anyway, really. So, but yeah, and because the from what I've heard, the Dogmans in Michigan, they are in more towards the north, and even the northwest. I feel like is where it's more common. Um, if I'm not mistaken. Well, like I said, we can definitely do a part two with and include that next time. But yeah, so the whole Dogman thing. Now, what I wonder about with that, because I've heard of with Dogman, we can talk about this time too. It's no problem. Some of them have glowing eyes, and they appear and vanish. That is one thing I have not heard too much about werewolves doing so much. A lot of what I found doesn't really talk about that being an option. So that's a fascinating. I mean, that means there's a difference there, somewhat of some kind, and it just makes me wonder what is the. Are there other differences? I mean, are there some that are sort of like the reports of Sasquatch or Bigfoot? Are there some versions that are either spirits or energy or they can travel between dimensions? Because I've heard of them just appearing and vanishing at times as well. I don't know if you've heard about that as well,
Yeah,
Jen.
I've heard of that. I have heard about that
Yeah.
with, I think, I mean, I think it's better probably, well, it's good to reference it. You might as well cross-reference it and kind of look at all aspects. But the werewolf, traditional werewolf, is that
Hmm.
the versions that I've heard about it is that it's either put on you, or it's
Right.
inherited. Like that's the traditional aspect. The traditional aspect having to do with the moon as well, the aspect of the silver and everything. And that doesn't really tie as much in with the
Yeah.
Dogman encounters as being, it's a little different.
Yeah. The dogmen seem to just
But
appear. They just seem to be there, and there's no source for them. There's no reports of them being human first ever that I've ever heard. They're just
no.
these creatures that look somewhat similar but not the same, and they just
Mhm.
appear and then they just vanish. So, that is a good point on that.
I
Um,
think
yeah.
one of the best accounts was that account. It was more modern, and I'll have to find it now. But that the report of that old man that had that tire shop, and I will find it. It was because it was a true account of this weird situation. Like I think there was the police were even involved, and the account of the den where the person seemed to be like that they would restrain themselves. I'll find it because it sounds too far fetched to believe, but let me look for it, and then after the show, I'll try to find the source for it. I'll post it to you, and then you could post it in your Salsido, like the actual in your general, if anybody wanted to look at the story. But the account was that it was a father and a son, or something like that. And I can't remember. I think it was animals, like livestock animals, that were like going missing, and people thought, well, maybe it's because I think it was a region where there weren't wolves or anything like that, but it was just in the old man too. They say that the
Hmm.
smell around the house was like that of like a animal's like a dog's den. Which if you've ever like I've been around by mistake a like mountain lions smell like their dens have that kind of, it's like a wet dog type of smell. It's like this really pungent smell in their den. All animal dens are like that, but like bear dens are like that.
Right.
But it's just, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just I'm not sure. It's just it is fascinating, but the aspect about like and it sparks my interest too is the even the silver being. That's why I think that they must be like there's some type of overlay with the stories of in fairy tales that silver or iron and things like that having an aspect, but this sort of overlay where there's a mingling somehow of this, that at some point there may have been sort of like a species of these sort of what we consider now mythical creatures, that there's an overlay with, the stories that people were telling back then. And I don't know if it was just the way that they were coming out of sort of all of the wisdom gathered through the ages of living close to nature like that before civilization really sank in to where people like where civilization started to develop beyond just tribal or chieftains and things like that, when they started actually making cities and developing this sort of civilization, that they definitely left something behind them. And the histories of how they, all of the wisdom that we have in the current age has to have come from that time period, because I mean it takes the mapping of the stars and things like that, and just the general mapping of in general, and then the properties of all the different plants and just the basics of the most incredible complexity of all of the wisdom of humanity. Having come from being so close, you'd have to be constantly close to that source to have that kind of wisdom. And so the drifting away of it into like a civilized state, we've left a lot of stuff behind. And that is one aspect that we have left behind, is a lot of these stories. So there has to be something, I think, to it, because we can't throw away all the wisdom we have now in medicines and things like that that originate from those times. The impossible knowledge at an astronomical, or with the astronomy and everything, and then the wisdom of the plants and all of that. I mean, just basically everything that we have now in modern society having come from that deep-rooted wisdom. And so when we throw away things like even the mythos of, say, Wendigo or werewolves or whatever the case, we're leaving something behind that may be really valuable to be aware of. And I've always been a huge advocate for keeping that stuff as best we can. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a folklorist, but I really admire it and think that they're extremely valuable, to
Yeah,
humanity still.
definitely. Yeah, and that's part of why I like doing these shows, is at least in our own ways we can help with that as well, a little bit here and there. So going back to this article, this is from spookysite.com. It has a section on cursed werewolves, and it says the curse is a powerful motif in many myths, so much so that many famous werewolves in history are the result of some sort of ancient curse. When they're cursed, they don't get any say in the matter. They're just victims of the curse, usually placed on them by a shaman or some other powerful entity. In some cases, that's also fascinating, because you either have it where some of these shamans and other people, sorcerers, they either become the werewolf, or in this version, or this other possibility, they turn someone else into the werewolf. So yeah, it does bring that up as well in this article here. So definitely recommend everyone check that article out, because it's huge, and I just happened upon it. One of those rare times where a web search actually brought up an article that was really useful right away. Doesn't always happen like that. Um, so, but so yeah, yeah, there's all kinds of and that's the whole other topic too. I mean, fiction all the movies and things and have TV shows that have come out over the
Oh
years.
yeah, for
It's
sure.
definitely it's still around in that way. So I do have one last thing left here I wanted to share, because I was thinking about it today, and I realized, I've seen here and there posts online about people having experiences with possibly with werewolves. So I
Oh yeah.
found this I did a search over on Reddit, because that's where I find a lot of all my stories basically that I use in my true story shows. And I'll put the link in the chat here so y'all can check it out yourselves. It's a long one, but it'll still work. I hope. Yeah, it doesn't even show an image, but it's still there. And so I'm just gonna sort of start going through these here, and I think it might bring up. Yes, this isn't one, but there's the whole. This is still a topic. So there's this one here. It says. It says that the title reads, "A wolfman is terrorizing my daughter," which is terrifying. So the post says that the writer's husband. Sorry, so I'll just read it real quick. It says, "So my husband, my 3-year-old, and myself have recently moved back into my husband's childhood home. He lived here uh, for 18 years. When he lived here as a child, he saw a wolf man standing in the doorway to his bedroom. But as he became older, he started showing himself less and less. Now, our 3-year-old daughter is seeing the same thing. It sounds crazy. I feel like I usually pick up on strange vibes in a house. I don't really feel anything bad here. My husband told me this story years ago when we first got together, so it definitely isn't something he just made up to match our daughter's situation, and he never told our daughter. So that's an example, and that I think that's a more unusual situation where it's inside the someone's home like that. A lot of times I've heard of them being out more just in nature, but that's a fascinating account there, because obviously you wouldn't tell your 3-year-old daughter, "Oh yeah, welcome to your new home. Your daddy saw Wolfman in here." So and yet the father and the daughter have seen the same thing in the same location at different times, but both of them saw them when they were children. So that's just one example of a more recent experience with this kind of figure. Uh, so, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that one, Jen?
I'm not sure what to think about that at all. I mean,
Yeah,
one thing I did think of was one weird aspect with werewolves, the whole typical in pop culture of getting like scratched by the werewolf, or somehow there's some sort of, this sort of transmission. Typically it's like being scratched or they were bit by or something. How similar that is to
right.
the vampire mythos. How strange that they
It
have
is.
such similarities. And they do have similarities too over, like I say, in Eastern Europe. There's this fine line in the Strigoi stories, like of the werewolf and the vampire. They're so close.
Right.
It's very interesting.
So I do
But
have
that
this other.
aspect of
Speaking of, yeah, sorry. I do have this other article we didn't get to, but it does bring up something I hadn't heard of this. Apparently, so I found this other article from All That's Interesting, and it says inside the grisly werewolf panic that swept Europe more than a century before the Salem witch trials. Uh, so this is talking about uh, again in Europe, hundreds of years earlier, before that the whole Salem witch trials thing. There were many people accused of lycanthropy or shapeshifting into werewolves. And this is back in the 14th century, so 1300s. There were fears spreading through Europe of course, witches and Satanists, all that. But there was also this fear of werewolves around the same time, and so this article does have like images like of I think woodcuts and all these things. So there was this one case in 1589 with Peter Stump, Stumpp. It was so this is well documented apparently, and it ended with him being killed and by fire to prevent any kind of coming back to life. So this let's see here. So yeah, this is just talking about how according to another website, there is this happened in Poligny, France in 1521. This other event. The story goes that a supposed wolf attack led authorities to the home of Michel Verdun, who, after being arrested and tortured, confessed to being a werewolf. He also pointed to two others in the area. So this is, I do wonder with these cases, how many of these cases was there any kind of actual werewolf going on there? And how many of these were, of course, similar to the witch trials in that there was a lot of it was based on not really any direct physical evidence. But this is another article in case everyone wants to read it, and just go into that whole this whole other topic as well. I think it's related, but also just kind of it's more about the people that were thought to be or alleged to be, but of course nothing ever proven. But yeah, so I've already included that in the links and everything, so we can go into that another time. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you've heard of those trials, Jen. I hadn't heard of that before.
I have heard of, there was the man who was, I can't remember his name now. I think it was pretty much the same story, basically that, he was attacking people viciously using his face a lot of times. It was just this sort of just psychotic episode of sorts. But what's really interesting about it is, the vampire burials that they've uncovered here and there, they come across them. They always have things like the bones are crossed a certain way, or there's a stone in the mouth, or they have already a stake, through the heart. They've literally dug up the bodies like this, and there's certain precautions that are taken. I found out burial and like that they literally bury them in a creek when it's dry, and then the water rises. It's kind of weird, like with rocks and stuff. There's all these. So the vampire sort of the scare of that, but with a lot of the Eastern Europe belief systems, and you also find it in just here in America too, amongst a lot of the native beliefs of the concept of the spirits of them rising up and possessing people, or sort of a vampiric scenario. And then the werewolf being sort of the concept with the curse of it, that they're so similar. I think that there is, that it's fine, the sort of parasitic dead, but the parasitic dead with an aspect of that it's the souls of sort of people who have turned to darker arts in magic and things like that. So there's a strong correlation with that. But the premise that these people were so terrified that they would take these types of precautions with the dead for fear that their loved ones would rise from the dead, that they would come and feed on family members. You find that down in the rainforest in South America too. They have very similar beliefs to how they handle their dead for fear of these things happening. I know it sounds like we're drifting away from the werewolf, but it's sort of all tied together with this concept of the werewolfism being a type of curse, sort of like vampirism, and that being something that can be transferred to another individual. So I think that that is an interesting aspect to it. But I have heard of the more, I guess, the easier explanation that there were people at some point that had a sort of mental illness, or they were outcast because they had an excessive amount of hair, or this or that. But there was such a delineation between these mythos and those explanations for what it might have been of just a sort of mass psychosis. There is quite a bit of difference in the development of the lore and the precautions against encounters with such creatures. So the development of the mythos, I think, is what's so incredible. It makes it difficult to just align it with an easy explanation. And I think because it is mysterious and hard to explain, that it falls into, and this is very common with even instances of exorcisms or things of that nature, that they will tie it into the mental health region now because it's the most the most easily accessible. I think that coalesces easily with science today because those things can't be explained with science. And as typical with the modern world, they'll try to explain it away quickly and easily so that people can get back to business. I think that that's kind of the excuse. Obviously, people were not talking about just a serial killer that would tear people apart with their
Right.
face. They were talking about something, I think sounds like that. I'd like to think that there
Yeah.
was something to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have another account here from that webpage, that search page I did. This one says this is some years back. We used to live at my mother-in-law's house, and she lived somewhat at the edge of town in the desert, and this is Southern California. There was civilization beyond her neighborhood to the south, but it was more rural, like dirt roads, very few streetlights, and eventually these neighborhoods terminated in a mountain or a large hill beyond, and beyond that was mostly wilderness. It says at the end of our street was a field where people would off-road and ride dirt bikes, and overlooked the neighboring the neighboring cities to the west. Really pretty and serene at night. I would often take go for a drive down the park, uh, take some beers and drink the beers there. I'm paraphrasing here, and drink and listen to music because my significant other didn't like how much I was drinking all the time. Yeah, at the time. So one night I'm parked out there doing my thing, and in the darkness, about 30 to 50 meters in front of my car, I see something moving through the darkness. I'm like, what the F or WTF is that? It was a fairly moonlit night. As it crosses into the clearing, I was able to articulate what it looked like a little more. Uh, and it was some kind of creature, kind of uh, trotting at moderate speed, that looked like a wolf of sorts. And I thought maybe it was a bear for a moment. So again, you're getting the idea of the size here. But as I watched it, it took place in a matter of seconds. It looked more like a big dog or a wolf than anything, but it seemed to look kind of off. It seemed bigger than any creature I had seen out there, and had kind of a hunched over look to it, and was just running or trotting on all fours, determined to get wherever it was going. It didn't seem to notice or care that I was there. I was a fair distance away, and my lights were off. After it passed, I got out of there. I put my car in reverse and headed back home. Uh, and basically just couldn't believe what they saw. It said that this thing was big. I lived in the area my whole life and never saw anything like it. I've seen coyotes and other desert wildlife. There had been snow, and I'm sorry, there had been bears now and again that wandered from the mountains, but this didn't look like a bear. Someone at work the next day told me it might have been a skinwalker. I don't know. Weird as hell. And so it asked if anyone saw anything like that. So that's just another example of, from the last year or so, reports of these kinds of sightings. So
It
they're
is
still
really
happening.
weird.
And,
I was thinking about with the
yeah.
Dogman encounters and stuff like that I've heard about a lot. I haven't listened to it lately, but I used to listen to it quite a bit, just different, stories and everything. But one thing that was really prominent that I thought was interesting as far as could it be linked to the werewolf stories is that the brief encounters people would have with what they could only describe as like a werewolf, or they would be like, I think it was a dog man. But they would find in one account in particular I'm thinking of that reminded me of this story reminds me of was the person was driving and they came across this massive, wolf-like creature that was feeding on something on the road, and it picked it
Yeah.
up and like drug it off the side of the road. And they said, it wasn't a bear. It looked kind of like it was like a giant wolf, a werewolf, a dogman, that sort of thing. But when people in these encounters with quote unquote dogmen, could they be seeing a werewolf? Because it's such a brief encounter, and when they categorize it that way, and when it pops up on those different podcasts and things like that, it's immediately relegated to dogman. But there could be encounters that maybe it's not. I mean, maybe it is, could be. I don't know, but it's become a catch-all, the dogman. That's why I think it's so fascinating to add that in, because they can't say for sure what it was. They see it and they don't know how to explain it, but that it has, not werewolf characteristics, but wolf characteristics. And they think to themselves, it's a werewolf, but it gets tied into being a dogman now. So it's really interesting, though, in the native cultures in America that I think, and with the skinwalker mythos and with the Wendigo, I don't think that's, I don't know. It seems like it does seem quite a bit different with just the cannibalistic aspect and it being a
Right.
wandering, possessing spirit. There's never a description that the person turns into a werewolf. So
Right.
they have their own stories about something that is more like a werewolf, and so that is fascinating. Or at least the skin walking aspect, that being able to put on the skin, which is similar, like we were talking about with a lot of the Slavic cultures, that they have the same sort of stories. So I don't know, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think we should that'd be a quite the 800th episode to do next weekend, next Saturday, as if we push the black-eyed children and humanoids aside for another time and cover dogmen,
Did you
because I
want to
don't think
do
we've
that?
ever.
Or did you want to talk
Yeah.
about, because we can mix it up. I mean,
No, that's fine. I don't mind continuing on with this sort of this topic until we get to a point where we're ready to let it go for a while. But yeah. So and I haven't really done any major research into dogmen either. So that could be
I don't know.
useful.
Or it'd be interesting if talking about the black-eyed children somehow ties back around again, and we can
Sure.
revisit it in a more like just as organically. Because I don't know, the black-eyed children mythos is really interesting too. So I don't think we can really go wrong
Yeah.
either way.
True. Well, I guess maybe we'll leave it for a surprise for now, and I'll do the research and we'll see where it leads and go from there.
We'll see.
But
Sounds good.
yeah. Well, thank you again, as always, Jen, for being here, and especially when dealing with a bit of a cold, as you mentioned before
I have a
the
bit of
show
a cold.
started.
I've
You
enjoyed it, and
sound
thank you
fine
so
though.
much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you as well, and have a
Have a good
great
night,
night.
James.
So, and everyone, thank you for all the chat there. You all were amazing. There's just way too much to even read all of it. But thank you all again for being here. If you're here for the live recording of this show, you're welcome to stick around in the Discord channel here, because I'll be recording this week's Trick or Treat show, call-in show where we talk about all things paranormal, as in trick, or basically that's the trick part, and or food, which is the treat part. So we'll be starting that pretty soon. So everyone, take care. Thank you all for being here, and we'll talk to you next time on Salsido Paranormal.